Joining us now to break down the issue of energy is Alex Epstein, the founder of the Center of Industrial Progress and the author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. So Alex, I'm really glad to have you on the program tonight. I think the book name kind of gives away a little bit what your position is, but I've watched a lot of your videos and I've watched a lot of your speeches as well. So I want to have you give your pitch to the viewer right now and say, do you think that fossil fuels are unfairly demonized?
Oh, yeah. I mean, totally. My basic position is contrary to the idea we should be trying to rapidly eliminate fossil fuels. I think if we care about human life around the world, we need to be using far more fossil fuels, not less, in the coming decades.
And of course, there's going to be people on the other side of this argument who say, yeah, but fossil fuels hurt the environment. They make our air worse. They make our water worse, things of that sort. So what's your response to those individuals?
So I have two quick responses. One is you cannot just look at the side effects of something. You need to look at the benefits. If you only looked at the side effects of vaccines, you'd be against vaccines. If you only look at the side effects of antibiotics, you'd be against antibiotics. That's one thing. You have to look at the benefits, and the benefits of fossil fuels are huge. They give machine power that makes billions of people's lives better. But the other thing is that in terms of environment, they also make our environment much better. Think about clean water. How do we have clean water? Because we have high-powered machines run by fossil fuels that pump our water to us and that purify our water. In places around the world without fossil fuels, they spend hours a day trying to get dirty water from distant locations. There are all sorts of other examples like sanitation in which fossil fuels and machine power make our lives much better.
And I've seen you make this argument in some of your speeches as well, and it's a very persuasive one. I mean, you have very much so scientific data. It's not just your opinion is really what I'm trying to say. I mean, your book is so thoroughly researched that you back up every single claim you're making. And one that I thought was very interesting is the idea that perhaps what you were just saying, fossil fuels don't make the environment dirtier by any means. In fact, they are prolonging a long education that could help in the long run. That's the argument that you're making. So when we look at the state of where we are right now, I mean, has it been proven that fossil fuels and capitalism is providing cleaner air and water?
Oh, yeah. I mean, water is the most obvious because you just think about somebody who was transported from 200 years ago to today, or somebody who comes from the poor world and goes to the wealthy world, which is mostly powered by fossil fuels. We have abundant, accessible, clean water. You don't have that in nature. So the broad point is nature doesn't give us a clean and safe environment. Nature gives us a dirty and dangerous environment. And machines powered by fossil fuels help make our environment unnaturally clean and unnaturally safe. Maybe climate is the most important issue here because people think, oh, we've made climate dangerous by putting more CO2 in the atmosphere. I do believe we've had some climate impact, but there's no climate catastrophe at all. Climate is far safer than it's ever been. That you talk about statistics, it's important stat, the death from climate, so the percentage of people who die from storms and floods and wildfires, that's gone down by 98% over the last century. If we're having a climate crisis, how are we 50 times safer from climate than we used to be?
And I've heard you say something along the lines before of we're not making our Earth necessarily more dangerous. The Earth is dangerous, and we need to respond in a way that makes us safer, whether it's being better prepared, putting us in economic prosperous positions where we don't have to necessarily be completely decimated by a hurricane or a fire, whatever it may be. So a lot of things that we're facing right now. So when we look at this issue too, I know that the government does have to be involved in some degree. For example, a corporation can't just be pumping out sludge into rivers, lakeways, or something like that. There are some regulations that are in place. What role do you think that the government should play in maybe moderating this in some degree?
Well, I mean, you could say the same thing just with normal life. Like, don't you need regulations against murder? And I don't really think of it as regulations. I just think of it as laws protecting people's rights. And the primary thing is property rights. You know, you have a right to your land, you have a right to your air, you have a right to your water. And so beyond a certain threshold, people shouldn't be able to emit into it. Now, what's really cool about capitalism and progress is the more progress we make, the higher standards we can have for emissions. Imagine if you placed today's pollution laws in the 1800s, everyone would starve and freeze to death because they didn't have the technology. But if we have rational thresholds, what we can do is become more prosperous, develop better technologies, and then we can increase the thresholds over time. But when you're thinking about the thresholds for pollution, you always have to remember that the dirtiest and most dangerous state is one with very little energy. So you always have to think again of the environmental improvement benefits of fossil fuels, not just the environmental harm side effects.
And building on that point, too, for example, former Vice President Joe Biden during the primary said that he wanted to do away with fracking. And now here he is in the general election saying that he doesn't want to take that same stance. And I'm presumably because of the idea that it would come as a detriment to many voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, so on, Ohio. So when it comes to the idea of fracking, is that something that you think is going to go away? Or is that something that is becoming perhaps more so the future when we talk about natural gas and things of that sort?
There's no technology that's contributed more to energy growth in the US and around the world than fracking. The idea that you could even consider banning fracking or talk about that, regardless of whether you're two-faced and you switch your view, is insane. If you understand how important energy is and how important fracking is, 60% of US oil production, 75% of US natural gas production comes using this amazing technology called fracking. Banning fracking is the single quickest way to create a depression in the US and a recession around the world. By the way, if people want to check my facts, go to energytalkingpoints.com and I have everything backed up there.
Yeah, and I know that you also mentioned it in your book as well, and I want to say that title right there, even though it is behind you right now. For all our viewers, it's The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and it's really a very interesting topic because, to be honest, Alex, I don't hear this side of the conversation very frequently, including from many Republican lawmakers. I feel like this is an issue that they don't want to touch. So when we hear the other side and we hear something that we don't always get in the mainstream media, I think it's very enlightening for a lot of people as well. Alex Epstein, I really appreciate you coming on the program tonight and giving this perspective.
Thanks so much for having me.